Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is one of the biggest mysteries in Mafia history. There have been many theories about who ordered the hit on the former president of the Teamsters, but his body was never discovered and nobody has ever been convicted of the crime. There are several theories surrounding this disappearance, nearly all of them involving made men from different Mafia families. One theory that holds up among the rest is that Russell Bufalino wanted him dead. This theory even inspired the novel I Heard You Paint Houses and the Martin Scorsese film The Irishman. But why would the infamous Mafia boss want Jimmy Hoffa dead? It turns out these two were closely connected, and Hoffa knew too much about the Bufalino family's criminal history. Stay tuned as we cover the ties Jimmy Hoffa had with the Bufalino crime family and the theories surrounding his disappearance. Russell Bufalino, also known as the Silent Don, was the crime boss of the Bufalino family from 1959 to 1989. This family was the leader of organized crime in northeastern Pennsylvania. Both of his parents died at a young age, and Russell turned to street crime during his teenage years. By 1928, he married Carolyn Sciandra, who was a part of a Sicilian Mafia family. Her family had connections in the Mafia, and soon Russell went from petty theft to working alongside mobsters. He used this experience to build ties with other Mafia members, which ultimately helped him further himself in the world of organized crime. In 1940, Russell Bufalino moved to Kingston, Pennsylvania. In this area, he worked with a crime family that organized activities in Pittston, Wilkes-Barre, and Scranton in Pennsylvania, as well as certain areas of upstate New York. By 1959, he was appointed the official Mafia family boss for northeastern Pennsylvania. It is believed that this is when the Pennsylvania crime family started being referred to as the Bufalino family. During his run, the Bufalino family was one of the most powerful crime families. For 3 decades, they controlled operations in various areas throughout New York, New Jersey, Florida, Ohio, and Canada. Russell was able to use his influence to gain power over labor unions. He also had connections to a corrupt U.S. Congressman, Dan Flood. Russell used this connection to obtain millions of dollars from taxpayer-funded projects. While the Silent Don was a low-profile leader, he was very powerful. Jimmy Hoffa served as the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters from 1957 to 1971. He was only 7 years old when his father passed away from lung disease. His family needed support, so he dropped out of school at the age of 14 to work manual labor jobs. He picked up a job at a grocery store, but it had very poor working conditions. The workers ended up forming a union. Although he was only a teenager, Jimmy showed a lot of courage and earned a leadership position. He left the grocery store in 1932 after refusing to work for an abusive supervisor. By this time, he had already made a name for himself within union activities. Jimmy Hoffa ended up getting invited to become an organizer for Local 299 of the Teamsters. When Hoffa first joined the Teamsters, there were 75,000 members. One of his first big achievements in this role was to consolidate local union trucker groups into regional sections, then into a national body. His efforts helped grow the Teamsters. By 1936, membership grew to 170,000, and by 1951, there were over 1 million members. His experience earned him the title of Local 299 president in 1946. Jimmy's power in the union was rising. He was even able to avoid military service during World War II with the argument that his work as a union leader was more valuable to the nation. By 1952, he became vice president of the Teamsters, then took on the role of president in 1957. The year he became president was also the year that he became the center of a criminal investigation. He was arrested in March of 1957 for allegedly trying to bribe an aide for a select committee. Jimmy Hoffa denied these allegations and was acquitted of the charges, but he was on the authorities' radar and this incident triggered more investigations. In 1964, Jimmy Hoffa was the subject of 2 separate trials. The first trial was in March, where he was convicted of jury tampering and sentenced to 8 years in prison. His second trial was in July, where he was convicted of conspiracy and fraud and sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison. However, he wasn't put behind bars right away. He spent the next 3 years trying to appeal the convictions, but didn't have any luck. In 1967, he began his prison sentence, but to his luck, he was released from prison in 1971. After his release from prison, he stepped down from his role as Teamsters president. He was awarded a $1.75 million termination benefit. But 4 years later, he became the subject of one of the biggest mysteries in Mafia history. It is believed that Jimmy Hoffa had close ties within the Mafia before he went to prison. Allegedly, he was working with the Bufalino family, Genovese family, Detroit Partnership, and other crime families. Why would the Teamster president be involved with the Mafia? Both parties were allegedly able to benefit from this relationship. Mafia families were well connected in the business world. Since Jimmy Hoffa was in good standing with them, they could help the Teamsters land more jobs. In exchange, the Mafia families could expand their operations using the Teamsters' pension funds. It is believed that the Bufalino family had the most influence when it came to the pension fund. Russell Bufalino was considered a friend of Jimmy Hoffa. There are theories that when Jimmy Hoffa was president of the Teamsters, he spoke to Russell Bufalino about arranging hitmen to take out his enemies. Getting Jimmy Hoffa's enemies out of the picture allowed him to stay in control for longer. The working relationship between Jimmy Hoffa and certain Mafia families seemed to be in good standing, but everything changed when the president at the time, Richard Nixon, commuted Jimmy Hoffa's prison term. He was released from prison early under the conditions that he was banned from union activities until 1980. Jimmy wasn't happy about these conditions. He began fighting to reclaim his role as Teamsters president, but he didn't have any success. This led to reckless behavior that infuriated several Mafia members. There are many theories surrounding Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. He wanted his role of president back and was angry things weren't going his way. Every time that he spoke to the media, he would speak about exposing the Mafia. Allegedly, the Mafia didn't want him back in charge because of his tight grip on the pension fund. In return, Jimmy Hoffa wanted to expose the Mafia for using the pension fund money to cover their corrupt plans. Since Jimmy wasn't willing to compromise, a lot of people were angry with him. Russell Bufalino was one crime boss in particular who had big concerns about Jimmy Hoffa. One of the most talked about theories is that the Silent Don ordered hitman Frank Sheeran to take care of Jimmy Hoffa. Russell Bufalino was known to be a low-profile leader. It's believed that he had concerns about the unwanted attention that Jimmy Hoffa was bringing in. Hoffa was known to be an aggressive leader and made a lot of enemies along the way. All of this was before Jimmy Hoffa went to prison. After he was released, the man was a loose cannon. Allegedly, his unpredictable behavior was one of Russell Bufalino's main motives for hiring a hit on the former Teamsters president. The Silent Don and Jimmy Hoffa had been close associates over the years. Jimmy knew a lot of information about the Bufalino family's criminal activities. The crime boss was worried that Jimmy would spill too much information. With all of the theories surrounding Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, they all led to one similar motive. That is, power struggles within crime families. Jimmy Hoffa allegedly had a lot of inside information that could lead to trouble. The Mafia typically has control over internal conflict, but with Jimmy Hoffa being a loose cannon after prison, there was a big concern over what he would say and to whom. However, Russell Bufalino's motive seemed deeper than other Mafia members that have also been accused of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. One theory is that with Jimmy Hoffa out of the way, it would allow the Bufalino family to gain more power and influence within the Teamsters Union. But that's not what happened. Let's discuss one of the most interesting theories surrounding the Hoffa disappearance. This is the theory of Russell Bufalino ordering Frank Sheeran to place the hit on Jimmy Hoffa. It is believed that when Jimmy Hoffa wanted a hitman to take care of his enemies, the Silent Don introduced him to Frank Sheeran, one of his most trusted hitmen. Frank Sheeran became friends with Jimmy Hoffa over the years and is even believed to have helped him maintain his power before going to prison. This was a man that Jimmy Hoffa trusted. As much as Frank Sheeran may have liked Jimmy Hoffa, his loyalty to the Bufalino family outweighed that. So when the Silent Don ordered Frank Sheeran to place a hit on Jimmy Hoffa, the loyal hitman didn't argue. The last place Jimmy Hoffa was seen alive was in the parking lot of the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan on July 30, 1975. Allegedly, Jimmy Hoffa got into a vehicle with Frank Sheeran and they drove to an empty house in Detroit. Jimmy Hoffa entered the house with Frank Sheeran following behind. This is when Frank Sheeran pulled out a gun and shot Jimmy Hoffa twice in the back of the head. Frank Sheeran wanted to make sure that the hit was quick and that his friend wouldn't suffer. Allegedly, after Jimmy Hoffa was killed, Frank Sheeran took his body to a crematorium to turn to dust. However, neither Russell Bufalino or Frank Sheeran were convicted of this crime. There was no evidence to connect them to the disappearance. A small amount of unidentified blood was discovered at the Detroit house, but it was not enough to connect the hitman to the crime. Jimmy Hoffa was the one who introduced the Mafia into the Teamsters Union. With Jimmy Hoffa out of the picture, the Mafia's influence within the union began to fall apart. Russell Bufalino was a powerful leader, but in the early 1980s, things started changing. The government was beginning to build cases against organized crime. While there was no evidence to convict Russell Bufalino of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, the crime boss was facing the heat for other legal problems. In 1977, Russell Bufalino was indicted for extortion. By 1978, he was convicted and served 3 years in prison. He was released in 1981, but it wasn't long before he was sent back. In November 1981, Russell was sentenced to 10 years in prison for conspiring to kill a witness. He served 8 years before he was released in 1989. At this time, he was no longer able to run the crime family, and the head title was passed to his protege, Billy D'Elia. The only thing we know for sure about Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is that he was last seen in the parking lot at Maucus Red Fox. Everything else is still a mystery. What's really compelling about this mystery is how many people claim to be responsible for doing the deed. Let's take a look at some of the other theories surrounding the infamous disappearance. Former hitman Donald Francos claimed to know what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa. Allegedly, he was part of a team with Jimmy Coonan that carried out the assassination. He claims that they dismembered the body and kept it in a freezer until they were ready to bury him. At the time of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, the Giants Stadium was under construction. Donald Francos claims that they buried him underneath Section 107 of the stadium. In 2010, the stadium was demolished. The FBI didn't perform a search of the area, so this theory has yet to be proved or debunked. Another possible theory is that Capo Anthony Pro Tony Provenzano from the Genovese family ordered the hit. Pro Tony and Jimmy Hoffa had a long-standing feud and were known to hate each other. It's believed that Pro Tony had Jimmy Hoffa killed. His body was then placed in a drum and buried in a toxic waste dump in New Jersey. To give this theory more weight, Frank Cappola claimed his father, one of the dump's owners, was one of the men who buried Jimmy Hoffa. The FBI did survey the area in 2021 but found no evidence. Marvin Elkind believes that Jimmy Hoffa could have been buried under the General Motors headquarters building that was under construction in Detroit at the time of his disappearance. Marvin Elkind was Jimmy Hoffa's driver. The way he put it was that the crime families get so caught up in their business that they forget the driver is there. So he knew more about what was going on behind the scene than people expected. He met with the former Teamsters president for coffee the day before his disappearance. Marvin had good reason to be worried about Jimmy's fate and even tried to warn him, but he claims Jimmy Hoffa thought his people wouldn't do him wrong. Allegedly, Marvin Elkind believed that Little Nicky Scarfo got the contract to place the hit on Jimmy Hoffa, but he doesn't believe that Little Nicky was responsible for the disappearance. These claims were never investigated. A lot of theories point to Jimmy Hoffa being placed in a body of water like a lake or swamp, but one theory that was strong enough to be investigated was that he could be buried under an above-ground swimming pool in a Florida backyard. After Richard Powell was arrested for murder, he made the claims about the swimming pool. His claims were believable enough to launch an investigation in the area, but police didn't find any evidence. These are just some of the many theories surrounding the Jimmy Hoffa disappearance. To this day, what happened to the former Teamsters president is still a mystery. For many years, Russell Bufalino and Jimmy Hoffa worked together. While they benefited from each other in the beginning, things changed when Hoffa lost his role as president of the Teamsters. Jimmy Hoffa knew a lot about the inner workings of Mafia families and was threatening to expose them. This was something the Silent Don couldn't risk. It's believed that he wanted Jimmy Hoffa dead to keep him quiet, but many other Mafia members had their own motives to want him dead. There are many theories surrounding Jimmy Hoffa's mysterious vanishing. Comment below on which one you think makes the most sense. Make sure you hit like and subscribe to see more videos like this.